Hi everyone. Today I'll be describing how to develop the results section of a clinical trial paper using a phase one study as an example. Um, so the results section of any clinical trial paper really should follow the CONSORT checklist. This is a checklist that ensures the clinical trial reports are clear, complete, and transparent by providing a structured guide for authors. And they outline the key information that should be included to improve the quality and reliability of trial reporting, and they facilitate reproducibility and peer review. So, consistency wise, it's important that the results section aligns with the flow of the method section. So present your results in a logical sequence in the text according to the sequence of what's described in the methods. So if efficacy assessments are described first in the methods, don't report safety results before efficacy in the results section. So essentially, it's important to ensure that the flow is consistent with both the methods and results, but also within each subsection of the results according to what's described in the methods. So, for example, in your methods, if you describe certain endpoints, a description of certain endpoints first, ensure that your reporting of these endpoints in the results aligns with how you describe them in the method. So, back to the consort, we can see here at the in the first of our sections for the results. So essentially, there are usually 3 to 4 key sections within the results that must be reported. So our patient characteristics or some information on the trial design, a report of the efficacy, report of the safety. Um, Generally, there could be some reporting of biomarkers or some other investigative or exploratory analyses, and maybe some subgroup analyses. So the consort specifies that we should refer to the periods of recruitment and follow up. So mention of some specific data is required, as we can see what the authors have done here. So other journals may require listing the locations where the trial was performed and the number of study sites. This is something that's also listed in the consort checklist. Um, be sure to check a journal's author guidelines regarding what's required. It's best practice to note the number of patients that were screened or enrolled. Um, Overall, it's okay not to break this down by location except maybe in a supplementary table, if the journal requires it. So referring to the number of patients in the safety and or efficacy analysis sets can also be reported, although this information should be evident in your tables and figures. So in this yellow section at the start, we want to communicate to a reader what were the demographics and characteristics of the patients according to the study eligibility criteria. So per the SAGER guidelines, it's best practice to report the number of male and female participants. It's usually sufficient to report the proportion of female participants and allow the reader to deduce the proportion of males from that number. So the SAGER guidelines were published in 2016 and they guide the reporting of sex and gender information in study design, data analyses, results, and according to the interpretation of your findings. One can easily get carried away by reporting excessive details in the results section. Don't fall into this trap. Consider if you were reading a paper you're writing, um, would you want to try and determine the message or story from a results text that's blurred with excessive data reported in the text or descriptions of characteristics not pertinent to the overall study? Remember to report the main and most important findings first. Do not repeat all the data in the tables or figures in the text. Emphasize or summarize only the most important observations. Remember or refer to what's been done in other paper, for example, as the authors have done here. We can see that table 1 is cited to referring to the baseline and patient characteristics. 9 times out of 10, table 1 in a clinical trial paper usually always reports these information. So after providing an overview of the trial conduct and patient population, the next section in the results section should be a description of the efficacy or safety of your assessed treatment. In this paper, the authors described how safety was assessed first. So they assess. This is what they reported first in the method, so appropriately they report safety first in the results. So as this is a phase 1 paper, it's appropriate to first describe the safety outcomes. For phase 3 papers, it would be appropriate to describe efficacy first, as this is generally the focus of such trials. A link to a video that described the method section development of this particular paper is in the description of the video. So here for this phase 1 study, some specific information regarding assessment of the maximum tolerated dose and what observations were the basis for selection of the recommended phase 2 dose is provided first. So this information is key to report for a clinical study that performed a dose assessment, and appropriately is reported at the start of the results section before we get into description of any adverse events that occurred. So it's essential to consider the flow and what information a reader should be provided to tell the story of your clinical trial. So here we can see that some information on the different doses assessed is provided first. So once we provided some information on the doses, next the authors here provide some information on the treatment emergent adverse events. We can see here that every patient in the study experienced at least one. Nearly half had severe reactions. Most events had improved or stabilized when the data were collected. Remember, percentages on their own are meaningless. So it's essential, as the authors have done here, to give numerical results not only as derivatives, e.g. percentages, but also as the absolute numbers from which the derivatives were calculated. So this is nicely done here. Also consider, when appropriate, to provide a range of the variability of each statistic. So either standard deviation for the mean or an interquartile range for the median. It's not appropriate or applicable here because we're the absolute values and their derivatives. These proportions are reported only. Also remember, when you're reporting percentage data, to report numerator and denominator associated with percent calculations. We can see here this N 491 is reported, so we can deduce the percentages from that as the authors have done here. So as I mentioned, the result text should be kept as brief as possible, and appropriately the authors have referred to supplementary tables when further details of the treatment emergent adverse events and their severity grade can be found. So as the authors have done here, a description of the safety results may also include a separate summary of serious adverse events or events deemed treatment related. Here again, the authors have described the most common events and their associated grade. So typically, some sort of criteria regarding what events should be reported is usually used, either the 3 most common, the 5 most common, or whatever. So these treatment-related events, which a reader would be most interested in, are reported in the manuscript safety table. This is table 2 here, instead of being reported in a supplemental table. So it's typical to report safety events that caused dose interruption or reduction or necessitated a patient discontinuing the trial. These events are going to be they would be important for any physicians reading this paper, so they can refer to such events when they're considering the drug for their patients once it's approved for clinical use. So finally, for the safety section, any deaths that occurred during the trial are usually reported at the end. It's critical to include a statement informing readers if these were deemed related to the study drug or not. And finally, consider reference to the CONSORT for Harm checklist. This is another CONSORT checklist that provides guidance on what information should be reported when reporting safety. So I recommend referring to this checklist when you're writing up your safety results. So next, the authors refer to the pharmacokinetic properties of their drug. So as I mentioned, besides safety and efficacy, it's common enough for papers to also investigate and report some biomarker or exploratory endpoints. So besides primary assessments of the drug safety and efficacy, these are also important and relevant for clinicians' information. So certain biomarkers, and these may reflect the drug's efficacy or its mechanism of action. Um, so since this is a phase 1 study that investigated different doses for subsequent use in a phase 2 trial, a pharmacokinetic assessment was performed. So PK assessment are a study of the kinetics of absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, the ADME, of a drug and its corresponding pharmacological, therapeutic, or toxic responses. So an explanation of the different measurements and stats pertaining to pharmacokinetic analysis is not only within the scope of this particular video, but I will provide an overview of these in a subsequent ones. But when writing up the results for a PK analysis, there are two statistics that are important to have an awareness of. We can see here first the Cmax. So the Cmax refers to the maximum peak concentration of a drug in the bloodstream after its administration. It represents the highest level that drug reaches before it begins to decline due to metabolism or elimination. So Cmax is therefore an important parameter for understanding a drug's absorption and its potential therapeutic effect. The next important statistic to be aware of when reporting pharmacokinetics is this next one here, the AUC, the area under the curve. This represents the total drug exposure over time, and it's the area under the plasma concentration time curve and reflects both the extent of drug absorption and its elimination for the body. So the AUC is a key parameter used to compare drug formulations, assess bioavailability, and determine dosing strategies. So as the authors have done here, a report on a drug's PK should include a description of the elimination half-life. So this is also important, and it refers to the time it takes for the plasma concentration of a drug to decrease by 50% due to either metabolism or excretion. So it's a key parameter when determining dosing intervals. So, and a longer half-life means that the drug stays in the system longer, while a shorter half-life may necessitate more frequent dosing. So in the next paragraph here, if this reports the drug levels in the patient's blood, they remain stable over time with similar exposure on day 15 to day 1, but there was a lot of variation between individuals. We can also see that the relationship between dose and drug levels wasn't clear, and that the drug did not significantly build up in the body with daily dosing. So if you're unfamiliar with any of the details of a certain biochemical analysis, PK, PD, that you're required to report in this study, this information should be available in either the study protocol, sometimes a statistical analysis plan, if available, a clinical study report, and some reference to how these should be reported will also be in your source table. So do refer to this information when writing up your analysis. If you're unsure, consolidate with the authors regarding how they would like this information to be reported. So next, we have efficacy. So as this is a phase 1 study, only a preliminary assessment of efficacy was performed. We're investigating, a phase 1 study is going to investigating different doses for further study and assessment of safety, but it's not uncommon to also have some exploratory analysis of efficacy. So what do we have? So following the outcome of this assessment in the phase 1 study, the doses will be further examined. The doses for assessing efficacy will be further examined in a phase 2 or phase 3 trial. So the authors have reported preliminary efficacy in two study populations: the intention to treat population, the ITT, and a subgroup population with a specific mutation that is relevant to this drug. So as this is an oncology study, um, the RECIST 1.1 guidelines were used to assess tumor response. We can see that um, partial response, complete response, stable disease, PR, CR, SD were assessed. So an overview of the RECIST 1.1 guidelines is provided in the methods video associated with this paper. So if you're interested, do check it out. The ORR, the objective response rate, this was also assessed as the measure of a treatment's effectiveness and represents the proportion of patients whose tumors shrink or disappear after therapy. It's a composite outcome and includes both the complete response, total tumor disappearance, partial response, so significant tumor shrinkage. The DOR, the duration of response, and PFS, progression-free survival, these are also both key outcomes in oncology studies, and these are also assessed. Again, use your study protocol, your SAP, the statistical analysis plan, data source tables, and clinical study report to guide how these should be reported. We can also see here subgroup analysis was performed. So it's typical for all phases of a clinical trial to assess efficacy and safety in relevant subpopulations. Here, patients with this particular mutation may respond differently to the investigative drug versus patients without the mutation. So the researchers have performed a separate analysis of these patients only, and what they found in this group, 26 patients in this subgroup had this specific BRCA mutation. 27% showed tumor shrinkage, so that's a partial response, while 73% achieved disease control, including those with stable disease. And what else? Patients with ovarian cancer responded better than those with other cancers, with 62.5% seeing tumor reduction compared to 30% non-ovarian cases. And the median DOR was 169 days and PFS was 215 days. Okay, so this is a nice, neat overview of the results section for a phase 1 paper. Remember that the flow and how each section is presented here, this can vary according to whether you're reporting on a phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 trial. As I mentioned, for phase 2 or phase 3 trials, efficacy is essentially, or it's often reported first. But remember, the four components that your results section should typically include are: one, an introduction or an overview of the style of the trial design, patient characteristics, related to the patient eligibility criteria, a report of the safety, a report of the efficacy, maybe a description of relevant biomarkers or exploratory analyses, and mention a reference to any subgroups that were of interest related to the particular drug or within the trial that you're interested in. So I hope you found this video helpful, and do please subscribe if you're interested in hearing any more. Thank you.